well, good afternoon, and welcome back from the break. I see we've picked up some people since this morning, which is fantastic. Most importantly, we picked up our speakers, who were it was a bit iffy, but this particular session is literally made possible by KLM. So thank that pilot. So the session, plenary number 2, Learn Societies Navigating a Sea of Change. I'm Michael Clarke. I'm president at Clarke & Company. We're a boutique consulting firm specializing in learned and professional publishing. I would bet, however, that no one in this room needs a consulting engagement to tell you that managing a professional society in 2017 is not for the faint of heart. I recently watched the film Lost City of Zed, which is pretty good actually, about Percy Fawcett's search for the eponymous lost city in the jungles of South America. This is Percy Fawcett. Back in early part of the 20th century, 1906 to about 1925. Many of his expeditions were sponsored by the Royal Geographic Society. Flash forward about 100 years, and cruise ships, as well as ships filled with university students, now ply the waters of the Amazon. And the more perilous work is to be found not in the jungles, but in the offices of Lothair Lodge, the society's headquarters. The hazards faced by society's executives are numerous. The business model that underpins the vast majority of societies is represented by a three-legged stool. I don't know why we don't come up with a more glamorous metaphor, but there you are. We're a humble industry. The legs of the stool are, of course, membership, meetings, and publications. ALPSP itself is an example of this. With this very meeting, various training events, membership, of course, I assume everybody here is a member, and the indispensable learned publishing. Of course, different societies will have different variations on the model. Some have a big meeting, some have small meetings, some have more publications, and so forth. A few lucky societies will have a fourth leg, such as data registries or certifications and so forth. The three-legged stool sometimes feels, however, like it's being buffeted like one of the umbrellas on the back patio today. A partial list of challenges includes keeping up with the expectations of members, which are increasingly being shaped by large multinational corporations. This is really a fundamental change in one that's often underestimated. When any organization with whom your members interact set a new bar, that bar quickly becomes the new baseline for everybody. So members now expect all customer service to be like the Genius bar at an Apple store. They expect the websites of society publications to work like Facebook, or at least the New York Times. They expect meetings to have the production quality of a TED Talk. Actually, ALPSP comes pretty close this year on that front, living up to the new bar there. They expect their membership to be supported with online tools like Facebook and LinkedIn. So the bar is constantly being raised from afar. Organizations are from outside our industry or professions can suddenly become competitors. So we're now seeing that with organizations like Lynda for training, which is of course owned by LinkedIn, which is of course owned by Microsoft. We may compete with ad hoc communities organized on Facebook for membership. Our publications, and especially things like reference works, are now competing with free digital resources. And we compete with the attention of our members with the entire internet and other kinds of media. Moreover, we're seeing funders get active in our space. We have combinations of funders and venture capital organizations backing what are now quasi-competitors like ResearchGate, which is in part funded by the Wellcome Trust, part by Bill Gates, part by Peter Thiel, and so forth. Demographic and cultural changes such that membership in professional associations is no longer the default decision that it once was. We're seeing the impact institutional sales, while on the one hand have had a stabilizing and even salubrious effect on society coffers, in recent years have on the other hand provided university faculty and students with access to society publications, which has resulted in said faculty and students questioning the need to join said society. Now even those institutions, those institutional subscriptions, the same ones that have eroded membership rolls, are themselves under pressure as library budgets are increasingly flattening or worse. And of course, funders, as well as some government entities, are increasingly mandating open access policies, though not always adequately funding them. So what is a society executive to do? Fortunately, we have a lot of smart people in our industry to figure these things out. Two such individuals are with us today, Hetan Shah and Alix Vance. Hetan is the executive director of the Royal Statistical Society, a body with over 8,000 members whose vision is to put data at the heart of understanding and decision making. He's also the chair of the Friends Provident Foundation, a grant making trust, and a visiting research fellow at the King's Policy Institute, among many other accomplishments. He will talk today about the changes he has instituted at the Royal Statistical Society over the last 5 years. Alix Vance is CEO of GeoScienceWorld, a not-for-profit collaborative and comprehensive internet resource for research and communications in the earth sciences. Alix will talk about what happens when a group of specialty societies in the earth sciences band together to develop economies of scale and competitive opportunities. And we will begin with Hetan.
So my core proposition to you is that learned societies do not have a right to exist. Many of us feel that we do because we've been around a long time. The Royal Statistical Society has been around for over 180 years, so we sort of feel like we've earned our stripes. But the world, as has just been described, keeps changing, and I think that the first thing to do is to accept we don't have a right to exist, and that means that we've got to keep innovating and keep pushing what we're doing. It's already been described how the business model of learned societies is under pressure. People are not automatically joining anymore. Many of the benefits of membership can be found for free if you try hard enough or at low cost. Journals, we're very dependent on journal income. In particular, social science societies are very dependent. The long-term prospects of that income are now unclear, particularly with the rise of open access debates going on around the world. Certainly in the UK, there's the scholarly communications license is the latest iteration of this issue. There are all sorts of other concerns around the business model. Some societies have historic pension liabilities, which are now coming back to bite them as well. So given this maelstrom of change, what's a learned society to do? So I was asked to talk about the Royal Statistical Society as a bit of a case study and to share some of the ways we've approached this, but also to be honest in terms of the dilemmas that we face. And, you know, it's not all a bed of roses. So to give you a bit of background, the RSS, as I say, is a fairly long-standing society. We have around 6,000 paying members, another 2,000 or so student members who are members for free, getting everything only electronically. Our turnover is about £2 million a year, which comes primarily from the three-legged stool that's been described, the membership, the journals, and then other sources. And I've been there now for 6 years. And I've come from outside the sector, so I'm a professional, not-for-profit charity chief executive. And I've instituted a number of different changes, including shifting the way that the society runs itself and manages itself. So I just wanted to have my sort of 10 or 15 minutes to run you through some of those changes. So the first thing we've done is made a much clearer strategy. So our vision is for data to be at the heart of understanding and decision-making. And we've decided that there are 4 ways within which the RSS achieves that objective. So the first is to strengthen the discipline. Now that's the classic mode of the learned society. The second is to strengthen the profession. And that also is a fairly traditional role of a professional body. So within that, we have the ability for you to become a chartered statistician. We run trainings. We have run examinations in the past. But we've added two other objectives which are perhaps slightly wider. The first is to promote education and statistical literacy. So that's an educative role which is beyond the kind of traditional narrower remit of the Learned Society. And the fourth, and perhaps the most radical, is to ensure that statistics are used in the public interest. And that, in a sense, is borrowing from a more charitable and perhaps NGO campaigning kind of model. So those four spheres talk to our different guises, as it were: the learned society, the professional body, the educative body, and the NGO. And the RSS is now trying to be an amalgam of all four of those. A further step we've taken is we've aligned our governance to the strategy. Often learned society governance can be quite antiquated, and we've got to move towards a much more modern way of working. So one of the things we've done is we've created a vice presidency which is for each of the four goals that I've just described. So the vice presidents now ask me, what are we doing to achieve the goal that I'm in charge of? As opposed to focusing on the activities, have we run a conference? Well, that's not the point. The question is, did we make a change in the discipline, or have we affected the public use of statistics? And the other kind of managerial change is a more professionalized staff, and all of you who work in the learned society world will recognize the shift, I think, over the last 20 years or so, of moving from a heavy reliance on a volunteer base. Now, those volunteers traditionally from academia are finding that they've got more and more pressures to do other things, are having less and less time to devote to the society, and the rise of the professionalized staff to take some of the burden, but also to offer new skills. So, we have press officers, we have policy managers, we have people who specialize in journal production, and these are not the skills of statisticians. So there is now, I think, an increasing recognition that the staff bring something to the table which the knowledgeable fellows of the society don't have, and there is a partnership there. So the next thing to talk about is taking a more commercial approach, and certainly when I started at the RSS, there was not a particularly commercial mindset within the organization. And it's worth saying, I want us to be commercial in order to benefit the membership. So we're not trying to be commercial towards the membership. It's a question of how we're commercial so that we can cross-subsidize the membership and have the impact in the world that we want to have. So one of the things we did was we tendered our journals. We'd been with the same publisher for years and years and years, and we'd let that roll on. And in fact, through tendering the journals, we've stayed with the same publisher, but I think it has put the relationship on a new footing, and a good one. And it means that we know that we've got the best deal that's out there in the marketplace for us. And that has taken a slightly more commercial mentality than the one that perhaps was there within the organization before. We have an annual conference. When I arrived, I was told that it broke even. I said, but you're not counting the staff costs. What are the staff costs that are involved? And by the way, do you count the overheads within that as well? And I was told no. So we did an exercise allocating staff time across the organization to, all activities, but when we looked at that across the conference, added in the overheads, it turned out we were making a £100,000 loss on the conference. Now, the amazing thing was that people thought we were breaking even. So doing the numbers actually helped people see that that was not the case. And we've now set ourselves the internal target to move towards break-even on the full costs of the conference over 3 years. We're in year 2 of that, and we're just where we want to be in that process. So it's meant that we've had a process of both cost reduction and also bringing in new sponsors and other things. We've closed down loss-making areas which have not really been meeting have not been kind of fulfilling the goals of the society. So one was examinations. We'd set up exams in statistics about 50 years ago. At the time, there were not many organizations running those sorts of exams. Now, there are enormous numbers of others who do that on a much bigger scale. But learned societies tend to start things, but tend not to close them down again. And that's a hard job to do. So there are things like that which we've closed down, and it's helped de-risk the portfolio of things that we do. I have 25 staff. One member of staff was running those exams along with a series of other things she was doing. If she left, and in fact she recently has, but thankfully we've just closed down the exams before that had happened, we would have been quite stuck in terms of our institutional knowledge. And there were also a whole series of risks in terms of what happens with international exams if a paper goes missing, etc., etc. So things which we'd done which were probably useful at the time, we've taken the decision are no longer the right thing for us to be focusing on. At the same time, we are looking at growing new areas, particularly for income. The biggest one, the area for growth that we spotted was in training. This partly came from when I saw that The Guardian, the UK newspaper, was running a course in data visualization. I thought, if The Guardian is doing this, surely there's a market space here which the RSS should be in. We have the gold-plated brand, not The Guardian. So we've really expanded our training provision, and we've taken it from 3% of our income back in 2012 to now 15% of our income. And it's continuing to grow, and at this stage I can't see where the ceiling of that income will be. So, that's really worked for us. It wouldn't necessarily be the right thing for every learned society. And we've looked more broadly. There's a slightly wild card project where we have developed an ISO standard for Six Sigma and Lean. So these are quality improvement tools. I won't go into the detail of it, but the point is we've got no idea whether there's a market for this or not. We've put a little bit of development work into this product, and we're now going to start training people within it and seeing if there's a market. If there is, it could be enormous, but it may just go nowhere. But I'm really pleased that we've got a trustee board that sees that there's a need to invest in some of these sorts of things to secure the future income stream. So in 10 years' time, where journals' income may have dropped quite significantly, this may be one of those new income streams. Other things we've done, we've tried to improve our policy and public impact. So impact is not dependent upon membership numbers. It's about being out there. So we've created products like this, our data manifesto, and this gives a story of all the different ways in which we think data can help improve public policy. And this is a document that I can hand to a politician or a civil servant quite easily, and they can put in their handbag or in their pocket and take away with them. And that's taken several years to distill the thinking of the RSS down into a simple document like this, which communicates a story. We've been very active in debates around how government could be more effectively sharing data, and that's led to some legislative changes. We've talked about how the future of the census should play out. What are the best ways of measuring inflation? And recently we've called for a new council for data ethics to be set up within the UK, and that's now happening, and we were the first body to spot that agenda and call for it. So we've really become much more active and is now seen as thought leaders within the UK around the data agenda. And that's been accompanied with a rise in our media profile, both because we are out there talking on behalf of the RSS, but also one of the issues is that one of the things we've done, we've created 24 Statistical Ambassadors, and those young statisticians have been coached by us so that they have the confidence to speak to the media. So whenever there's a statistical issue, we now have young statisticians who are willing to go on the radio or on the television and talk about these issues. So we're trying to increase the confidence of the profession to be out there. We've also noticed that the Oxford English Dictionary got a lot of publicity when they had their word of the year last year, which was post-truth. I know you all have heard that word. So we're now planning a similar scheme called Statistic of the Year, which we're about to launch later this month, asking for the public to nominate what they thought was the statistic that captured the zeitgeist of the year, and which we have a heavyweight judging panel to decide upon what that is, which will be announced at the end of the year. So these are, I think, kinds of initiatives that are slightly different to what a traditional learned society has done. Other innovative projects we've engaged in to try and engage our membership, we've set up a data science section. So data science is the new buzz field within the data world, but often is seen as apart from statistics. So we take quite a broad church approach, and we're trying to bring these new organizations and individuals who may not self-identify with statistics into our fold. We're also doing a lot of work encouraging our members to do pro bono work, working with charities and third sector organizations, and that now has support from a philanthropic foundation. We also have a partnership with the African Institute of Math Sciences, and we send 3 of our fellows out there every year to teach statistics on their courses. So trying to tap into the goodwill of our members and help them understand that it's more than receiving benefits for themselves, it's about what they as statisticians can give back to society, has been a really important agenda for us. And another innovative project, which we've had actually for some time, but we've continued to improve, is this magazine Significance, which is a really high quality publication of the sort of new scientist or economist style that you could pick up from the shelf. And so alongside traditional journals, we've been trying to create products which might appeal to a wider mainstream. Turning finally to the question of membership, we have, as I said, a paying membership of around 6,000 people. That's been on a very slow decline, but it's been largely static for a decade. And most learned societies, I think, are struggling with this question of how do we recruit, retain, and engage our members. So there have been a few things we've done. One was we did confront the fact that a few years ago we hadn't been increasing our membership fees, and so over time that meant that we had lost a whole set of income. I think our council had sort of lost some confidence in doing that. So we took the radical step of increasing our fees by 30% to sort of catch up. And the way we sold this to our members was to tell them, and this was the truth, that we wanted to increase our income now to invest for the future. And that is the sort of thing we've been doing with some of the projects I've been talking about, like the ISO and the training. So that went down well. We did lose some, there was a higher level of membership attrition in that year, but we did increase our income from membership by 13%, and the attrition wasn't as high as one might have expected. But more generally, looking beyond that sort of commercial side, we've really been trying to tell the story about membership as being about being part of a community of interest and being part of a movement for change rather than purely about what benefits do I get through the door. Because those benefits, as we've heard, are weakening in terms of you can actually get most of those benefits if you try hard enough through other sources. So one example of this movement idea, when we had a general election in the UK a couple of years ago, we mobilized the RSS volunteers and members and said, write to your MP and write to all of the candidates who are standing for election and ask them, if they get elected, will they take statistical training from the RSS? Because we want our parliamentary representatives to understand basic statistics. So this was a case where we were asking our members to do something for us and for the cause, rather than the members saying, what are you doing for me? And it's changing the notion of what we are towards something closer to a body that you might join because you believe in a cause, Friends of the Earth or an Amnesty International or a national trust, as it were. So, and as an aside, we then had over 300 candidates sign up because of this campaign, of whom 50 were then elected MPs. Several of them have attended training, and we're chasing the rest around Parliament as we speak. More boring things, we've invested in a new CRM system that we're just kind of getting sort of done now to give members more personalized content. This speaks to what was said earlier about the expectations of members in terms of what they receive. And we've also, thinking about the pipeline, we've created a free e-category for students, which means that we have their details. They start getting a taste of what it means to be a member of the RSS, and then in the longer run, we hope we can go back to them at a point when they may have some, they're slightly more mature in their career, and they may have some income enough to be able to be a full member of the society. So let me stop there. And in conclusion, as I say, my basic premise is we don't have a right to exist. And I think if you accept that, then lots follows from that. You've got to keep innovating. You've got to respond to member need in order to retain and recruit members. And you need to learn lessons from other sorts of organizations and move beyond the traditional learned society model. So we've been looking at the private sector to consider how we might become more commercial, and we've been looking at NGOs to consider how we might be more effective in influencing policy. None of this is easy. There's no guarantee of success, but I think the changes that are upon us force us to look beyond the traditional model of the learned society. I hope our case study has been helpful. I'm around now and also for the workshop tomorrow morning to talk it through in some more depth. Thank you very much.
Okay, hello, I'm Alix. So I think Michael asked me to talk a little bit about just doing things differently, how societies might do things differently. As he so articulately described, more articulately than that, we face a lot of new challenges in their own different forms, and some of those are occurring at a different scale than we're traditionally used to. I think in particular, he actually just asked me to describe a little bit of what GeoScienceWorld is, the organization that I run, and how we do things. And why would that be interesting? We're a bit different because we're a nonprofit secondary publisher, not a society ourselves. We're really a collaboration of different societies globally. And there's some differences in the way that we go about things. But the question that I want to raise here is that, in an overarching way, we are trying to operate and compete in a much more scale-based environment. We have a great deal of sort of different operands in that competitive environment. And how might we be able to sort of raise ourselves, uplift ourselves, and face those challenges more effectively? So here I'm talking about, how might we shift our mindsets to embrace more fully the benefits of collaboration? And I will start out by just talking a little bit about GSW's model. At its scale, what is it? How's it different? How it works? Does it work? What are the results? And then what's next? How do we look at strategic opportunities? So very, very briefly, for those of you who have never heard of us, we're an integrated package of journals, books, and data across the earth sciences. So we're across that one domain in particular. We're also a cooperative community of societies and stakeholders, a global network for marketing and institutional sales. We share a digital infrastructure and a platform for product development. So it's not just banding the content together, but also looking at synergistically what we might create next. In 2017-18, we've moved to a new platform provider. We've added a new society services program so that we can expand what we do for the individual societies. And as I mentioned, some of our initiatives are based on increasing scale-based benefits to those societies. So these are some of our participants, mostly society and academic publishers in here. And these are our origins, actually. So this is where I mention Bio1. We were founded the idea was actually in the early 2000s, which was just to help actually some of the smaller societies kind of get on the digital bandwagon, if you were, and to help them get out there and disseminate content globally, actually get them into consortium and so forth. So Bio1 is the only other model that I'm familiar with that had the same sort of premise. And we actually started with many of the same founding documents, but have taken them in rather different directions. We are governed by a board of directors, including society, librarian, and researcher members. We have an advisory council of publishers. We seek shared opportunities for technology and product development, also for global sales. The fundamental mission was the bringing together of all this content and also the bringing together of all the different players. It enables the larger societies to give some assistance to some of the smaller societies, still focusing on having really a high bar, sort of a premium expectation for the contributions of the content themselves. The primary driver then was to uplift the science by conveying uniform and more competitive advantages to independent societies. And that is still relevant, but as Michael referenced, I think there are different mechanisms that are needed as the industry and the environment becomes more consolidated and complex. This is the GSW model. It's sort of this is the how-to, the building blocks. We're slightly different from a commercial publishing model, but how? We're actually, it was the former executive secretary of the Geological Society of London who said, we're a shared risk-reward venture. So we really are quite collaborative in that sense, quite familial. Instead of having a system where you come in with us, we decide a royalty, this is what you get paid. Actually, the way our business works is we net out the net, and the participating publishers are like stakeholders or shareholders and get a portion of the net. So we must do well. So those remittances are determined algorithmically based on content contributions and also on usage. Participation is non-exclusive. People can do other things, although we've certainly learned that it is very helpful to have the content all on a common platform, and that's a great improvement for SEO and not to have to deal with as much complexity and multi-resolution. Via the Society Services program, which we launched this year, we're also doing separate things in addition to serving our aggregate to serve customers of the societies themselves. So the core services that we offer are represented here. There's curation of content so that you know what kind of level of quality you're getting in the aggregation overall. Hosting and dissemination, marketing, global sales, renewals, we do ourselves for the most part. Publisher and vendor technical support, we do a great deal of project management. Digital strategy, so we're quite active in either working with the societies in collaboration on their own strategies, but also on the collective strategy, platform maintenance and upgrades, access to pricing and volume pricing opportunities, consulting and research that's useful to our community. So we'll frequently bring in consultants that are of interest to the variety of societies we work with. And I think the other feedback that we consistently get is that the participating societies really value the forum just to get together and talk with each other, which I think we do in this sort of environment, but they also like to do this sort of within their own domain specialization. Investment in program and platform. So one of the things when I talked to Michael about, well, why would anybody care about GSW, really? He said, well, one of the things you do differently is you don't just do sales, you also are heavily involved in digital innovation and in platform. So we include other things. For example, we've had an ANI database, the GeoRef database, in our collection since 2004. We geo-reference the content, which helps us. We have a thesaurus in there. We have a deep taxonomy. We have geolocation coordinates for the content. So that helps us with faceting and filtering by subdisciplines and subtopics. We use map-based searching. This is the kind of stuff that sort of keeps me very intrigued day to day. This is the stuff I love. So we have created, for example, an open map-based data discovery layer that came out of the idea that a lot of the researchers in our area were interested sometimes in coming into the content through the data layer and actually scanning the figures in the data to pre-qualify their interest in an article. So those are the kinds of things we do. We launched an ebooks program 3 or so years ago that now has 2,000 titles in it. It's been very successful. We launched the Society Services to expand what we can do for the societies themselves. And then this year, as the process of our migration to Silverchair, we also converted the entire back file to JATS, and we did that on GSW's dime. So a few distinctions here. Thinking again, is this similar, different, how, to a commercial publishing model? My own thought is, for the longest time, we could be do-it-yourself publishers and do-it-yourself societies. And that can be and has been a successful model. These days, I'm seeing more of my own societies really get challenged in that space. So you have over here, you have commercial models, which can work well, and you have do-it-yourself. But it seems to me that this is getting squeezed quite rapidly. And I'd like to see, personally, a little bit more of a space in between. And so is there an alternative where you don't go all the way over here, and you're not left alone to do it here? So these are some of the distinctions that I've been thinking about. So we prioritize very much society independence and society self-direction. We are, as a nonprofit, quite mission-driven to assist and sort of unencumber the societies. Some of the business that we've gotten into in digital product development and sales and the things that the market requires us to do are sometimes really beyond the ken of the societies that we work with. It's not necessarily the thing that they should spend all of their time focusing on, because it's the business of digital publishing, it's not the business of science all the time. The other distinction, I suppose, is this thing that you receive proceeds from the business rather than just a fixed royalty. And that creates, I think, a couple of different things, but a greater sense of partnership, a greater sense of skin in the game, if you will. As a nonprofit, we're seeking to sort of utilize, actually, as was said, we're a nonprofit, but we like to behave commercially as well. And there is this little bit of a liberating thing, which is that we sometimes can be a bit more agile. We have a smaller governance group ourselves, and that's been advantageous. So, but overall, what we're looking for is to identify what the competitive advantages the societies need in order to continue to go forward and focus on what they must do and get the proceeds, get the best proceeds and the best combination of results for themselves. And so that's where we just try to function right in that space. So going back to what it is, just sort of by the numbers, we're a collection of 46 journals from 28 publishers. We have 2,000 ebooks and a few million GeoRef records. We serve about 1,100 customers, academic, government, professional, and consortia in 45 countries. We have paid out almost 30 million in royalties to societies since we started in 0405. Just in the last few years, I'd say since the last 4 or 5 years, we've spent about, what is that numbers? A little more than 600,000 in our own R&D investments to help the society. So that's outside of the budget and the society royalty pool, but it's investing back in strategic directions that we think will be helpful. Again, we're managing ourselves, for the most part, this migration to Silverchair, which will launch this fall. So that's, again, a thing where we want to relieve the burden from the societies to the degree possible so that we can continue to update their platforms, help them choose appropriate partners, go through the RFP process and so forth, get them in the best technological position they can be in. Results. How does this work? Does it work? We've had great results, I'm very happy to say. We've had a 74% increase in revenue over 5 years, CAGR of 11.73. Full text and PDF journal article usage increased almost 30% in the last year period. Our journal's royalty pool went up about 19%, so that was a payout of almost $4 million in 16. And the new ebooks program, which has had 3 years running, has generated, it was positive and paid people back in the first year, and it's generated more than $1 million, so that's been a good thing. And that's only a 10 publisher program, so it's a little smaller. So this is what the royalty and retainer pool looks like. So, the one thing I would say, we're a nonprofit, I'm quite focused on growth. So this is a mantra that I will always, speak about with my publishers. I will really beat them to death with the idea of growth. And so, and in a way, it's like, well, I'll beat you to death about growth, and it'll be my job to accomplish that for you. And you can do what you need to do in your society, which should really be about science and not growth, necessarily, or have a mechanism for growth through us. In open access, these are sort of the ways that we're developing this program. We are largely a hybrid program and still a subscription program now, but we have a whole hybrid system in place. We also have our open data discovery layer. We are developing sustainable models for higher percentage and 100% open access publishing. And we do participate with Chorus, and we will be advancing our compliance after our migration completes this fall. So, next plan. So you have this base, and we've been doing a strategic planning ourselves, and I think the thing that occurred to me through that process is, this is great, this has worked well, but what's next, right? And I have a sense that, yeah, there's a lot of things that we can do in the geosciences, but again, thinking about the drivers of scale in the overall industry, how do we take that to the next level? How do we make it more sustainable? How do we keep going forward with this model, and I think we very much need to. I actually don't think there's enough scale in geosciences publishing, even if we got everyone together. So how do we then think more broadly about that? And in this, along these lines, I came to an article that Michael had written for the Scholarly Kitchen in 2015, which was about horizontal and vertical scale. And so we'll talk about this, I think, on the panel tomorrow, too. But it's very appropriate in our domain bundle for us to invest in vertical enhancements to the product. So those would be new technologies for geoscience industry, new technologies for geoscience discovery, for scholarship. And we're very engaged and work with kind of the subject matter experts in the societies to think about how do we really continue to advance how that science is exposed to people who are making next discoveries. At the same time, on that business side, we're going to look at how do we explore routes for increased horizontal scale, and what does that enable us to do? And that's why I think we're talking about who are we competing with in the larger market. When you look at the, as Michael said, we're competing with billion-dollar companies. Well, I might not be competing with a billion-dollar company every day, but let's think about it a little bit that way. How can we drive our prices down so that the business that we do is sustainable for us going forward? So that's what we're looking at there. This is sort of, repeating the same thing. It's sort of, so in the moment, it's a best of these few worlds. It's taking nothing away from societies that they do now, but actually enabling them to do more of what they should be doing. At the same time, looking at the best of commercial publishing practices and opportunities and seeing how we can harness and leverage more of that. So that's sort of here. Competitive advantages, focusing on growth because growth conveys sustainability, giving societies flexibility, confidence, independence, so that they can prioritize the advancement of the science. I think this is the last one. So this is actually, to the degree to which this is a do-it-yourself. Here, take this, build one yourself. These are the pros and cons and the lessons learned. So we've been very successful in terms of global sales, product development, and IT opportunities. I can say that we end up being quite different from other people in the marketplace. And I think I can see Lauren nodding her head, but it's the model mechanics tend to be complex. They're not industry standard, and we require customized technologies and back-end support to make that all work. It's not impossible, it's just something to bear in mind. Multi-resolution, as I mentioned, has been a challenge. Version of record hosting is much better for SEO and discovery, and that's quite important. It requires strong back-end services, ops, finance, project management, and strategy. So in my shop, which is a small shop, we're really divided into two groups. And I do, strategy, sales, project management, that sort of thing. The other one is a really solid operations, finance, renewals, and so forth, customer service group. So that's really, really important to have that in-house. The other thing that we've found is that just in running our business, titles acquisition can sometimes go by the wayside. You really need to have a dedicated effort, I think, in acquisitions. And the other thing that's interesting about the shared apportioned model is that there can actually be some resistance because people don't want to share their money. So they don't want more publishers in there because they'd like to keep their share. So that's an interesting little tension that crops up. The other thing that I just observe is that governance structure is really, really important to how you do this. It can make all the difference. So, as I mentioned, Bio1 and GSW have slightly different governance structures. You can sort of see that we go in different directions that way. But I just think if doing something like this, it's really important to be thoughtful about who you have in your governance structure, how agile that keeps you, and just expect that will have, it'll help color what we ultimately see coming out of the business. So I think that's it. I think we're going to go back to the table and we can ask questions and so forth. Yeah? Okay. Thank you.
Fantastic. And we have a few minutes for questions. I'll start with one while the audience formulates some of the questions. So this is for both of you. You both have, Alex, you had ended with talking about your governance model, and Hetan, you had talked about just all of the changes going on at Royal Statistical Society and trying to really reposition the organization. How do you bring along your board of directors, or are many of the changes coming from them, or is it back and forth? In other words, how do you bring together your volunteer leadership or your leadership to make what are some some difficult and at times bold decisions, often in instances where there aren't clear paths?
So can I point to three things that we did? You're quite right. So we've got a council, which is our board of trustees, of 30 people. So if you've ever tried to get 30 people to do radical things, you'll find it's tricky. They'll normally vote to keep doing the same things. So the first thing that we did was when I started, we did an 18-month strategic process, which was farmed out to a group which was outside of the trustee body, and that's how they wanted to do it, so I kind of worked with that. And to build the trust in that process, we sent that, we first of all took thoughts from the membership, from leading lights within the organization. All of our subcommittees were invited to kind of give thoughts. We formulated and sort of wrote all that up into quite a long document because there's a lot of change that was needed. We then sent that back out to all the people, including the whole membership, for consultation, and we gave it to the council in draft form for their comments. And it was only after everybody had commented we sort of changed it again and then took it back to the council. And they then ratified that document in its entirety. And there was a lot of change contained in that document. So I think if I'd gone to my council and said, let's raise membership fees by 30%, they would have said no. Whereas because it had been through such a kind of collaborative process, and it was one idea amongst a whole series of things, and they could buy into the package of changes, they accepted all of those. So that was one. The second is we pushed for an executive committee. We already had an executive committee, but that was 16 people. So, I mean, that was still enormous. So we now have an executive committee, which is much smaller. So we streamlined the governance. And it's that committee, really, which is my working committee, which works with me and the senior management team to deliver. And the council has taken on a more sort of strategic role to say, where are we going? And, you know, they can step in if they think things are going wrong, but otherwise they've delegated much more to the executive committee. And that committee, I think, works very, very well. And the final thing is just over time, I think I have built trust with the council in terms of my own role as chief exec. So if you go back to my predecessor but one, my job, which is now called executive director, was called executive secretary. So the notion was your role is there to administrate. Whereas I've come in from the charitable sector, and my view, you know, the chief exec role is a powerful role and drives change. So I have to show my council that I'm attuned to what they want, but I may not do it in the way that they're used to, but that I'm trying to safeguard the legitimacy and the gravitas of the society and the traditions of the society within that. And, you know, I'm still here after 6 years. So.
I think it's much the same. I mean, I would say we have a relatively small governing body. We have a larger advisory council. We do build trust, cultivate trust through results. We certainly have fairly independent decision-making. And I think on the kind of collaborative side, which you also mentioned, is that I've also been there for 6 years. We've spent 6 years having conversations. And so I think it's really interesting to me because we've sort of we've gotten so much more cohesion. It doesn't mean that every society is at the same place of thinking or that their own stakeholders are at the same place of thinking, but we've cultivated an attitude through conversation and also through bringing in really interesting experts to talk to people. So we've cultivated a different viewpoint on kind of what the challenges and opportunities are. And and it's ended up in really good alignment.
Question over there.
Tasha Mellins-Cohen, Microbiology Society. You both spoke quite a lot about professionalism and moving towards a more professional, maybe even commercial way of thinking. What I would be interested in is where you think the single most important new skill is for yourselves and for your team members in the context of that professionalism.
It's a really good question. I'm not going to have one, I don't think I'm going to have one simple thing, actually. Because I think, as I said, there are different roles that are all very important in making this happen, and it's no one driver.
I'd say, speaking from my own much smaller organization, it is the meta skill is lifelong learning, right? Because you don't know the skills for this year are going to be different from the skills for 5 years from now. So it's this perpetual learning.
Evolution. Well, I think it's also a continued examination. Where I was sort of going to go was that I always still go back to. I tend to be fairly analytically driven. So, it's just being able to step back and evaluate where you are and reorient. So we make a lot of evidence-based decisions, as it sounds like you do. And then, as I said, we also have sort of a split in the house where we have, real sort of operating data analytics group, and then we have a little more free-spirited sort of envisioning folks. And that is a blend that works well, but both of those groups need to keep honing their skills and broadening their perspectives.
Hetan, you talked specifically about 2 new skills that you're trying to inculcate: data visualization and amongst your members, but then more broadly, statistical awareness amongst the members of Parliament.
Sure, I think that's a wider issue. Obviously the RSS wants everyone to be statistically literate, but in terms of answering your question about the skills of my staff team, and whether this is specific to the RSS or not, I don't know, but I think it's recognizing that change is going to happen and keep happening. And so when I started, within my first 3 months, I did a very, very small staff restructure. It wasn't making anybody redundant. It was moving a couple of people's line managements around. And this was just greeted with a kind of deathly hush, And then when I did go on to make a staff member redundant about 18 months later, the fallout took, I'd say, 12 months. People were there just had not been a redundancy ever. And I, through having done that, had broken the emotional contract with the staff. And there were a lot of long-standing staff members, and, there's a very familial culture, as it were, within the RSS. And in a sense, I haven't wanted to take away from that, because there's a lot that's very good about that. But at the same time, I think we're now at the stage where there is a recognition that just because we've done stuff in the past for a long time, there's no guarantee that will happen in the future, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's taken a long time to get there, and there's been natural evolution. People who don't like that way of working have left, either because of their own accord or because of other reasons.
The other thing I might add is, I suppose, most of what I'm talking about in terms of our future trajectory is about partnership and collaboration. And so selecting partners is a very important part of that. People you collaborate with are an important part of that. And I think that actually is opening up an entire new learning opportunity, because you don't only just select the right people to work with, you also select how to work with them, but also how to learn from them. So I think this is the next, we pulled together a group where we're all benefiting from each other, and let's bring that out to the next circle and work out how partnership can be optimized that way.
Jignesh Bhate. I work for a data science company. We provide data science solutions to publishers. Couple of things in terms of culture change. So I have 2 questions. One is, do you see a significant effort to change the DNA, the culture in the company, to move it? And what were the specific steps on that? And second, Hetan, you particularly mentioned about having data scientist team now. Can you talk a bit more about, I think maybe it is also leading to what Michael said about data visualization or data science. What are your plans in that area?
So, I mean, on culture change, in a sense, all the different things I was talking about were all part of a big picture of culture change, as it were. So, I didn't say very much about this, but I brought in, over time, several members of new staff. So we brought in a director of commercial and marketing, for example. And I think that has just been an evolution over time, that cultural change, as it were. For me, the key is if you can get clear on your strategy and keep asking, what are we doing and why are we doing it? And then aligning governance and staff and everything with that, then the culture change comes. On the data science section, so we have set up a group within the society which is for data scientists. So I hope it's attracting new members who would not traditionally have joined the RSS. And we're considering moving into the data science space in a big way now. So we're considering setting up a new journal in that space. We're considering setting up awards for good data science use. And we're having a lot of conversations with a number of bodies. Now, in a sense, that rather than go through the activities, the key strategic point is that we as a society had a choice. We could have said, oh, that's not statistics. Statistics is the real truth, and all this is kind of computer science dressed up with, a few numbers, and these people don't know what they're doing. And there are some within our membership who would have preferred to have gone that way. But we decided to be a broad and open church. And if you go back to the roots of the society, I mean, there were no statisticians to start with. They were all scientists in other areas dabbling with numbers, as it were. So we have a great kind of tradition of being open, and we wanted to continue that.
Last question.
I was just wondering if data scientists would then be represented in the governance board, kind of elbow to elbow with the statisticians.
Sure. So, I mean, the way that our governance works, which is probably quite traditional, is that the board is elected from the fellowship. So, if we're successful in getting these people to join, and I think that's starting to happen, then over time you would expect them to then join the board. But in a sense, I think that at the top level, people are pretty keen to accelerate that process, as it were. So I suspect that will happen more quickly than just through a sort of natural, organic process.
Well, thank you. We're going to be exploring these topics further during the breakout sessions tomorrow. But thanks both of you for the talks.